As soon as we become sincere about wanting more healthy attitudes and emotions, the question comes into focus, what stands in the way? More often than not, the key obstacle is a self-image that needs to change. We talked with one man whose spiritual work has especially centered on a set of soul development lessons called A Search for God, designed by Edgar Cayce.
The primary obstacle in changing one's emotions or changing one's attitude is self. We become used to the idea of how we've defined our reality. It's like flat world thinkers. While they believed the world was flat, nobody wanted to go to the edge. Once they started to discover that the world was in fact oval shaped, then moving past the limitation became easy. And changing one's attitude is exactly the same thing. Mind is the builder. That's how the obstacle is always overcome. If you just give yourself, and I mean generically, if a person gives himself permission to change their mind, that in itself overcomes the obstacle. When I first got involved in the A.R.E. Search for God program, one of the biggest temptations was, coming from a Roman Catholic background, to try to be as holy as humanly possible. However, the material encouraged be more normal in everything. So as I thought I was doing everything that would make me have a better relationship, avoiding certain company, not using profanity, never taking a drink, you know, all those kind of things that supposedly constitute holiness. I had a dream one night that showed me walking around with my hands folded 2 feet off the ground. And the dream was attempting to tell me that I was not grounded. And so I needed to adjust that attitude in order to be much more efficient in my spirituality. You're simply saying to yourself, I can then change my attitudes. I'll learn to work with God. Cooperation. I'll learn to know who I really am and who I am in relationship to this being. Know thyself. I'll learn to measure myself not against the attitudes of the earth, but rather instead measure myself against what this being says I am. Your sons and daughters of the Most High. This is my compilation in terms of the most important attitude. From my experience, I would call it in 3 small phrases. Be God's kid. Act like it. Measure only by God's traits, the fruits of the Spirit. That's it. There's nothing else to do. Everything else is fluff.
If we actually would measure our lives by God's traits, the fruits of the Spirit, we would find that we often come up short. But with effort, we begin to see results. Doubt begins to give way to faith. Judgment to an attitude of mercy. When we come back, we'll explore one of the most crippling attitudes, seeing yourself as a victim. We're back, and we're speaking with Tom Baker about healing attitudes and emotions. Tom, our own times have been called an era of the victim. Everybody seems to be able to find somebody else to blame. What goes on when we slip into victim consciousness?
The main thing that starts victim consciousness is the attitude that my misery lies outside myself, that the source of my misery comes from someone or something outside myself. The behavior that cultivates this is criticism, defensiveness, and contempt.
Well, where do we learn this kind of victim consciousness? It seems to be so pervasive. What's the source of it learning-wise?
Well, if you go into a household and you see a conflict happening, what you will often see is someone trying to blame someone else. The idea that a conflict is resolved through blame often leads to a sense of victim consciousness.
Let's go back to fear. It's such a pervasive emotion. We spoke of it in the first half of the show. How can we begin to overcome fear?
3 attitudes help. One is to know that you can choose between love and fear. You really can. You can choose the attitude which will help you to feel either loving or fearful. The second one is to believe that this instance is the only time that there is, the only time available. We believe this when we're in love. We believe it when we're having a whole lot of fun. but it's actually the case all the time. The present moment is always available, and it's where God lives. Another one is remember that you don't need to change anyone. People choose to change themselves. For me, this is God's attitude. It empowers you, and it empowers me.
I see all three of those kind of weaving together, being in the present moment, using free will, calling upon divine resources. They really weave together into a program, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Now, before you became a psychotherapist for a career, you were a theologian. And I'd like you to speculate a little bit about how organized religion can potentially help in the healing of attitudes and emotions.
Organized religion tends to prioritize. It makes available loving attitudes. It tells stories about them. It sings songs about them. It helps you to practice them. It ritualizes good attitudes.
So this is ritual in the positive sense?
Absolutely. Ritual in the negative sense, sometimes religion does promote negative attitudes with do's and don'ts and ultimatums. That's a fearful-based kind of thing. But religion does good things.
So it's ritual in a community setting that helps focus energies? Or?
Yes, because in a church, you have people around you who share your values and probably are trying to develop the same loving attitudes you are.
Well, as a therapist, I'm sure you've had to wrestle with your own issues. Could you talk about an issue from your own life where you had to heal an attitude or an emotion?
Well, I had an attitude that in order to be successful, people had to heal the way I wanted them to heal and in the time that I had designated. This started to cause me to burn out. When I returned people's will to them and my own will to me, I let go of a lot of frustration.
So did you become impatient with people?
Very. In fact, I became angry with people. Edgar Cayce said that the strongest part of us is our will. When I was able to give them back their will, it's like my will came back to me, and I stopped being impatient.
And once that's healed, is it healed once and for all, or do you have to keep re-healing that?
I re-heal it every day.
Well, you mentioned anger a moment ago. Let's think a little bit about how we deal with anger. It's an issue that all of us have to wrestle with from time to time. Are there principles for transforming anger?
In my experience, the core of anger is helplessness. Whenever we feel helpless, whenever we feel like a victim, people are constantly trespassing upon us, then we feel angry. Now, what happens is we often cultivate the anger with criticism of ourselves, of the other, with defensiveness, with contempt of another person, with saying, I give up, I'm out of here. That actually makes us more angry. If we go back and we say, I don't have to be helpless, I can choose to be safe, and I can watch where I'm safe and cultivate safety, then anger stops being a big issue.
So there's a lot of energy there in anger, isn't there, if we can find a constructive way of making use of it?
Exactly. Exactly. The energy, you can start to use that for yourself in developing an attitude. What happens often when people feel very energetic when they're angry, but they feel exhausted afterwards.